orthopraxis to me is how we behave to other people. Like, I don't wear a cross.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to me. I love to see them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't wear one, because if I can't convince you of my faith by the way I'm acting, then a cross is just cheap jewelry that I share with Madonna,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that's all there is to it. It's just a piece of jewelry. And so I'd much rather have people go, wow, that guy is a whatever based on how I'm acting.
I think a perfect transition, because I wanted to get into talking about like the role of the mind and that kind of thing with you. I think it's fun because I think we're both people who, like to read books and like to write books and like to talk and like to do all that kind of thing. And so it's interesting because I have very much that part of me, obviously. But then I sometimes, just feel like I want to be like Shams in the story about when Rumi and Shams met, and Shams, he was reading all these books and he just took the books and was like dropping them in the river. I think in the version of the story I've heard that then they were actually dry, and there was the miracle that he was showing him
Right.
about, that there's something more than just in the books. But I think in my case, I'm sometimes thinking like, and they can just float on down the river. So
Right.
it's like there's that part of me, and I think, I tend to think of it as the mystical part, but it's connected maybe with the heart, and that sort of wants to just like with that. But so I'm just curious about, like, I think there's a lot to dig into here though, because I think the mind does have a role. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so when we say mind, I would say there's a difference between what I believe and what I will think about. So, people, that this comes up actually in the context of like UFOs and stuff, and people will say, "Do you believe in UFOs or ghosts? Do you believe in all these?" I don't know what belief means in that context. I'll think about it, because gosh darn it, it's way interesting. It's probably the most interesting thought I'll have today. But I don't know what believe means. Belief, I reserve for a very short list of things that I put my faith into. So, I'm not one who puts his faith into money, although I've done well. I'm not one who puts his faith in material possessions, although I have everything I need and I want everything I have. I'm always still trying to pare it down and lose out, things off. So I think there's a duality in the way we think and the way we feel. And I think sometimes the word mindfulness is actually a misnomer, because it makes it, I'm afraid when we say mindfulness, we forget that there's plenty of things that we don't bring into our mind consciously that are still there. And maybe that's something also that I happen to think that most people, maybe a lot of people don't think about, is what can I get rid of? What can I chuck? What am I lugging around still after all this time? And I'm as hard on myself as anybody could ever possibly be. People will put something bad about me on the internet, and I think that's nothing. You ought to see me trying to go to sleep at night. I'll give you thoughts 5 times worse than that. But I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, because I think a lot of people associate the mind with monkey mind, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
Or getting into maybe really wrapped up in thoughts in an almost navel gazing kind of way.
Right.
But I don't know. Like, I think that there's definitely a role for the mind in lots of different ways. I mean, I think of, the kind of contemplation we've been talking about, for one thing. I mean, even when we were describing the still small voice, I mean, it was actually in words, in your particular case. And I've had experiences like that too.
Right.
So I think there's a role.
But I don't know that words are just symbols, right?
Yeah.
So the words I would get are totally different than the words that somebody else might get.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not trying to differentiate too much between heart and mind or mind and soul or anything. But I do think there are a lot of people that try to calculate out. They try to think out the world. And I think that's where they get bogged down. They worry, they think about what other people think of them or whatever. I don't care. And I don't care.
And you're right that in a way isn't separate either. Like there's a lot of other things, like maybe stuck emotions and all kinds of things going on there that aren't just the mind, that are all intermixed in that kind of a thing that might be causing someone trouble. Like Santa Divina is interesting because it's very much, the book, you're doing a contemplative read, but it's got these different stages. So it's pulling in different ways of interacting. You've got, including a stillness at the end, but part of it's very much pondering.
Yeah.
So
I like writing more than I like reading. And so, I mean, sometimes when I've got like I have this podcast right now, which is like a horror suspense podcast. And I think, some people said like, really wasn't expecting this from you. And I think good, because that it's, I could have done something that was much more kumbaya. I could have done something which is in sort of traditionally inspiring. But I happen to think that some of the ways which we can be inspired the most is to think about the things we're trying to avoid and or the way our mind works to avoid thinking of. That's why I'm so interested in true crime, for example. I find true crime very biblical. I find it very normative. It's always telling us, this is not good behavior. Don't do this. Or this is how you treat people. Don't treat them like this. This is bad. And this is, or it's a focus on justice, or it's a focus on a lot of things. And I find that more instructive than other things.
Yeah, I think the mind has a very big role to play actually in something like that. I guess turning it onto itself to reflect, and for avoiding spiritual bypass, for example, that kind of thing. Absolutely.
Do you know the song "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones?
I think I've ever heard it, but I'm not very familiar with it. I couldn't tell you the lyrics.
Okay, so I love the Rolling Stones. I happen to love that song, and it's all about what the devil would say to us, right? Or what the devil's trying to, and he's asking for like some sympathy, like, hey. Don't get so mad at me. You're the one who did all these things. I didn't do them. You did them. You listened to me. You shouldn't have listened to me. I'm the devil. And I remember once suggesting in seminary that would make a great hymn. And I mean, the look of horror, but I happen to believe it's true that sometimes it's that thing which we shouldn't, instead of just like, there's a lot of Jesus is my boyfriend music, I just doesn't do anything for me at all. But man, every time I hear that song, I think I got to do better. I have to do better. I cannot give into that. That's where I have to be really good about what I have to decide what thoughts I'm going to let into my head. And anyway, that's why. Yeah. So I think there are times when, oddly enough, it's the opposite of what we should do that is the most beneficial to us.
Well, it's a good example of where the inspiration and, in a sense, call, not maybe as strong as a call there, but like is coming from. That's another thing that I've worked with a bit, is like, what are we counting as practice? That's like a video I have that's coming soon. Like that we tend to get into these like rigid ideas of like what counts as practice. So, if we're not even like hearing where the message is coming from, that's a problem.
Oh, well, I love that, because I tell people all the time, I'm a very unorthodox person, and I like it that way. And I try to be I try to be liberated enough in the way I approach the world to not be stuck with some orthodoxy. But orthopraxis is a different thing altogether. So, that same word praxis in Greek, which gives us practice, straight straight acting is different than straight belief, because to say, well, these are, this is the orthodoxy. Yeah, it is. And that's why a lot of people get all screwed up, because they're always trying to look orthodox to other people. And I think, well, that's a fool's errand. But orthopraxis, that's different. Then we're going to practice a straight kind of thinking, or a straight kind of behavior. Okay. And that's what I do. I try to I put a much bigger emphasis on orthopraxis.
Can you say a little more about that? Like what that looks like for you? Any part of it you want to share?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I have no secrets. I'm looking forward to having a good secret one of these days, and I don't. So orthopraxis to me is how we behave to other people. Like, I don't wear a cross. It's very important to me. I love to see them. But I don't wear one, because if I can't convince you of my faith by the way I'm acting, then a cross is just cheap jewelry that I share with Madonna.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. It's just a piece of jewelry. And so I'd much rather have people go, wow, that guy is a whatever based on how I'm acting, not because I'm going, look, back, like everybody, like the world is full of vampires or something, and I'm just, that's what I do. That's how so it's with other people, with students, colleagues, strangers on the road. I try to always just be in that moment where I can be a help or a blessing. I can try to be a joy and not a hindrance to other people's joy.
Yeah, that was very helpful to hear those specifics around it. I think, let's see, we're nearing the end of our time. So I'm going to circle back to the book again. And just whatever comes to your mind, what would you most want people to take from it? It's a big question, but what comes to your mind today?
Well, so let me run through three things real quick. So how to pray when you're pissed at God, since we talked about that a little bit. Just remember that the majority of the prayers in the book of Psalms in the Bible are angry psalms. It's weird for people to think that, but it's true. I mean, they're not the majority. I guess they're the plurality, so there's not the majority. But the greatest number of psalms, because there's like 5 categories of psalms, the greatest category are the imprecatory, and they're kind of accusatory, and they're kind of calling God out, saying, "Why is this happening? Why did you do this to me? This is awful." And I think that's part of our process. I think that's orthopraxis.
Yeah.
We should always be in dialogue, not, I'm fine with what's happening, this is great, but to actually, and not to put bumper stickers on it, like I used to hear all the time complaints from people whose children were in the hospital, and they're like, oh, my friends are coming by going, well, I guess God needed a little ballerina in heaven. And they said, no, we needed a little ballerina here on earth. God, and that's just people trying to make something right by saying dumb stuff. So how to pray when you're pissed at God, it's a good thing to practice. If you're angry at the divine, shake your fist at the divine and get it out that way. Have an honest dialogue. If you're in a partnership with somebody, you don't walk around all day long or all year long just going, I can't possibly bring that up, because that's only going to make the problem fester. It's only going to make it worse. So that's that one. And remember too that at least in the Judeo-Christian sense, the angriest prayer in the whole Bible is spoken by Jesus on the cross. It's not Psalm 23. It's not, it's not a comforting psalm. It's Psalm 22, which is a really pissed off psalm. And who can blame it? I mean, he's had to be in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And then for how millennials can get us out of the mess we're in, the point is that true leaders have to be willing to give up leadership. And they have to step back. And it's time for millennials to step forward. I mean, nothing wrong with Gen X, but they're probably too busy listening to Sheryl Crow or something. I don't know, Nickelback. So the idea of millennial leadership, to be around, to have to live through the consequences of your decisions, that's what we need. We don't need these titanic egos who are going to stay in office until they're 96 years old because they figure the state of California or whatever is going to fall into the ocean unless they are there. And I've just used California as an example. There's plenty of them. So that's important. And then it's important in a true crime sense to always be thinking about justice for other people. And especially when it comes to women, and to always be re-examining. Just because we have the police and we can all support the police and challenge them at the same time to do better. So, and that's one of the calls of true crime.
I don't know if you have a way that you prefer people to contact you. I can put it in the description box, of course, too. But
I'm on Twitter. It's really the easiest way to do it. So at Deacon Punnett, and it's just an ongoing conversation. Feel free to reach out.